I was lying in a hospital bed, too weak to lift my own hand, when someone I trusted more than anyone in this world was signing away everything my family had spent 4 generations building. I could not speak. I could not move. I could barely breathe on my own. But somewhere outside those hospital walls, a pen was moving across paper, and my name was being used without my permission. By the time I opened my eyes and understood what had happened, the land my grandfather had worked his entire life to leave behind was already gone. And the woman who made it happen was my own wife. Her name was Katherine. My name is Daniel. And this is the story of how the person who promised to stand by me in sickness and in health used my sickness to take everything I had left, with the help of the one man who should have protected it alongside me, my own brother, Robert. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. When I finally left that hospital, I did not come home to comfort. I came home to an empty house, closets cleared out, her side of the bed untouched for weeks, and a for sale sign staked into the front yard of the property that had belonged to my family since before I was born. There was no note. There was no explanation. There was only silence, and a question that would haunt me for months to come. How does a woman who once wept at my bedside, who held my hand through every test result, every diagnosis, every sleepless night, turn around and help dismantle the one thing I had left to hold on to? I did not have an answer that day. I am not sure I fully have one now. What I did have, when I finally sat down with the paperwork, was proof that this was not a decision made in a moment of panic. This was not a woman overwhelmed by fear, making a desperate choice to survive an emergency. The signatures on those documents told a different story, one that had been written long before I ever got sick. And once I started pulling that thread, I realized the land was never the only thing I had lost. I had lost the version of my life I thought I understood completely. To tell you how this happened, I have to take you back to before any of this began, back to a time when Katherine and I were simply two people building a life together, when Robert was simply my younger brother, the one I looked out for, the one I never thought twice about trusting. Because the truth is, the people who hurt us the most rarely look like a threat in the beginning. They look like family. They look like home. And that is exactly what made this so hard to see coming. The land itself had a history long before Katherine or I ever set foot on it. It was purchased by my great-grandfather in the early 1900s, a stretch of farmland that fed our family through hard winters and harder years. My grandfather expanded it. My father maintained it. And by the time it passed to me, it was not just property. It was the one tangible piece of proof that 4 generations of my family had survived and built something worth passing down. My father used to tell me that land like that was not meant to be sold. It was meant to be protected, no matter what life threw at you. I believed him completely. I met Katherine at a mutual friend's wedding, nearly 9 years before any of this happened. She was warm, funny, easy to talk to, the kind of person who made you feel like you had known her for years within the first 10 minutes. We married 2 years later, in a small ceremony on that very land, under the same oak tree my grandparents had been married under decades before. I remember thinking, standing there, that I had found someone who understood what that place meant to me. Looking back now, I wonder how much of that understanding was ever genuine, and how much of it was simply her learning exactly what mattered most to me. My brother Robert and I were close growing up, the way brothers often are, competitive but loyal. He struggled more than I did, financially and otherwise. A business venture failed in his late 20s. Another one barely survived a few years later. He never asked me for money outright, but there were comments, small ones, about how unfair it felt that the family land would eventually be mine to manage, even though we were both my father's sons. I never took those comments seriously. Family talks like that sometimes. I did not realize how long resentment can sit quietly beneath the surface before it finally decides to move. Looking back, there were small moments I brushed aside without a second thought. Katherine asking more questions than usual about the property's value during a casual dinner conversation. Katherine and Robert exchanging quiet glances at family gatherings, glances that ended the moment I looked over. A phone call late one night that Katherine took in another room, her voice dropping low the second she realized I was awake. None of it seemed significant at the time. People have private conversations. People ask questions about family property out of simple curiosity. I told myself these things, and I believed them. because the alternative was unthinkable. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Catherine and Robert had been building something between the two of them long before I ever got sick. Not a romance, at least not one I have ever been able to confirm, but an understanding, a plan that required patience and required me to trust them both completely. And I did. I trusted my wife with my entire life. I trusted my brother with the one thing my father asked me to protect. That trust is exactly what made everything that followed possible. It started with a chest pain I ignored for almost 2 weeks, convinced it was nothing more than stress or exhaustion. By the time I finally agreed to see a doctor, my heart was already failing me faster than anyone expected. I was rushed into emergency care within days, then into surgery, then into a recovery that stretched far longer than the doctors originally promised. For the first several weeks, I could not hold a conversation for more than a few minutes without exhausting myself completely. I could not sign a document. I could not review a bank statement. I could barely remember what day it was some mornings. Catherine became, in everyone's eyes, the one holding our family together. She was at my bedside constantly, at least in those first few weeks, the version of her that everyone saw. She spoke with my doctors. She updated my parents. She fielded calls from concerned friends and extended family, thanking them for their prayers, assuring them I was improving. To anyone watching from the outside, she looked like a devoted wife doing everything right. What none of us could see was what she was doing in the hours she was not sitting beside my hospital bed. In the evenings, she said she needed to run errands or handle bills. In the phone call she stepped outside to take. During those same weeks, paperwork was quietly being prepared. A power of attorney document, one I have no memory of ever discussing, let alone agreeing to. An appraisal was scheduled for the property, conducted while I was still confined to a hospital room, unable to attend or even be informed. A buyer was found within days of that appraisal being completed, someone connected to Robert through a business acquaintance, someone willing to move quickly and quietly. The offer was well below what the land was actually worth, but speed seemed to matter more to everyone involved than a fair price. By the time I was strong enough to sit up on my own for more than an hour, the sale had already closed. I did not know this yet. I was still recovering, still grateful simply to be breathing without machines helping me, still trusting that everything at home was exactly as it should be. Catherine visited less frequently as those weeks went on, always with a reason, a headache, a family matter, exhaustion from managing everything alone. I did not question it. Why would I question the one person who had shown up for me every single day since this began? The first time I truly sensed something was wrong was the day I asked Catherine, in a voice still weak from weeks of disuse, how things were going with the property taxes that year. She paused just a moment too long before answering. It was such a small hesitation, barely noticeable, the kind of thing you forget within seconds under normal circumstances. But something about it stayed with me. I did not know it yet, but that hesitation was the first crack in a story that had already been finished long before I ever asked the question. I was released from the hospital nearly 2 months after I first walked in. I expected to come home to rest, to slowly rebuild my strength, to spend time with the woman who had supposedly fought so hard beside me through all of it. Instead, I came home to a house that felt strangely quiet, and a stack of unopened mail addressed to me that Catherine had apparently set aside without mentioning. Among that mail was a letter from a county records office, referencing a property transfer I knew nothing about. I read it 3 times before I let myself believe what it actually said. I called Catherine into the room and asked her directly what this letter meant. She told me it was a mistake, that the county must have the wrong address, that I should not worry myself with paperwork while I was still recovering. I wanted to believe her. I wanted, more than anything, for there to be a simple explanation. So I let it go for a few more days, resting, recovering, telling myself I was imagining problems that were not really there. But something about her answer had felt rehearsed, and once that thought entered my mind, I could not make it leave. I drove out to the property myself the following week, against doctor's orders, still weak enough that the short drive left me exhausted. What I found waiting for me, there was a for sale sign, already taken down, replaced instead with a small plaque bearing a new owner's name I did not recognize. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before I could make myself get out and walk the land my grandfather had once walked. It did not feel like mine anymore. In truth, it was not mine anymore, and had not been for weeks. When I confronted Catherine that evening with what I had seen, her explanation shifted entirely from what she had told me days earlier. Now she said she had been overwhelmed managing everything alone while I was sick, that she had made a difficult decision under pressure, that she had been planning to explain it to me once I was stronger. I asked her why Robert's name kept appearing in the documents I had since requested copies of. She stopped answering my questions directly after that. 2 nights later, I came home from a follow-up doctor's appointment to an empty house, and a silence that told me everything her words never had. Her closet was empty. Her side of the bathroom counter was bare. Her phone number, when I tried calling, no longer connected to anything. I contacted her family, people who had known her for years, and even they claimed they had not heard from her. I hired an attorney within days, and together we began pulling together every document tied to the sale, every signature, every date, every name connected to the transaction that had taken my inheritance away from me while I lay in a hospital bed unable to stop it. What we found next was worse than I had imagined. The documents my attorney gathered told a story far longer and far more calculated than I had allowed myself to imagine. Emails between Katherine and Robert dated back nearly 14 months before I ever felt that first chest pain. Well before any diagnosis, well before anyone could claim this was a decision made under the pressure of an emergency. They had discussed the property's value. They had discussed potential buyers. They had discussed, in plain and unmistakable language, what would need to happen if I ever became unable to manage my own affairs. This had never been a desperate choice made by a frightened wife trying to survive a crisis. This had been a plan, built quietly, and waiting patiently for its moment. Reading those messages, I understood for the first time that my illness had not disrupted their plan. My illness had been the opportunity they were waiting for all along. I do not know, even now, whether they hoped I would recover or whether my recovery was simply an inconvenience they had not fully accounted for. What I do know is that somewhere in those emails, in a message dated only weeks before my hospitalization, Katherine wrote to Robert that she was, in her words, tired of waiting for a life she felt she deserved. I read that sentence more times than I care to admit. Buried further in the records was something I had not prepared myself for at all. References, subtle at first and then undeniable, to a relationship between Katherine and Robert that went far beyond business arrangements or family loyalty. I will not pretend the details did not gut me completely when my attorney first walked me through them. The two people I trusted most in this world, my wife and my own brother, had not simply conspired to take something from me financially. They had built an entire second life together, one that required my full trust and my eventual absence to make room for. My attorney filed formal charges of fraud and forgery within weeks of uncovering the full extent of the paper trail. Robert was the first to be questioned, and within days of that questioning, he began cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing records and testimony that confirmed everything the emails had already suggested. Katherine, wherever she had gone, remained unreachable for months. My parents, who had once adored her, sat through depositions learning the same painful truths I had learned, watching a version of their daughter-in-law reveal herself as someone they had never actually known at all. The court proceedings that followed were slow, methodical, and far less dramatic than anything on television. There were no dramatic outbursts, no last-minute confessions delivered in a courtroom. There was simply evidence, presented patiently over weeks, building a picture so complete that even Katherine's own family stopped defending her. Robert received his sentence first, reduced significantly for his cooperation. I sat in that courtroom and looked at the brother I had grown up with, the brother I had once trusted without hesitation, and felt nothing close to satisfaction. Only exhaustion, and a grief I had not expected to feel for someone who had betrayed me so completely. Katherine was finally located a little over a year after she disappeared, living under a slightly altered version of her own name in another state, working a quiet job at a small retail store, seemingly attempting to build an ordinary life for herself far away from everything she had left behind. When investigators finally brought her in for questioning, the money from the sale of the land was almost entirely gone. Some of it had gone toward the life she and Robert had briefly tried to build together before that relationship itself fell apart under the weight of guilt, suspicion, or simply the reality of what they had done to get there. The rest had disappeared into debts, spending, and choices no one could fully account for. She did eventually face charges alongside Robert, though by the time her case reached its conclusion, Robert had already served the majority of his reduced sentence and was attempting, in his own way, to rebuild some version of a normal life. Katherine's sentence was longer, her cooperation with investigators far less forthcoming than her former partners had been. I attended her sentencing. I do not know exactly why I felt I needed to be there in person, only that some part of me needed to see it through to its end, to witness the final chapter of a story that had cost me more than any court could measure. What the courts could never return to me was the land itself. It had already changed hands twice more since the original sale, developed into something my grandfather would not have recognized. There was a financial settlement, eventually, money awarded to compensate for what had been taken. But money was never really what this story had been about, not for me. What I had lost was something no settlement could restore, the version of my life where my wife and my brother were simply the two people I trusted most in this world without ever having to question it. I think about my father often, about the words he said to me the day he first walked me across that land as a boy, warning me that it was not meant to be sold, no matter what life ever threw at me. I did not break that promise willingly. It was taken from me while I was too weak to defend it. But I have come to understand that the deeper promise, the one about protecting what matters most, was broken by people I never once suspected capable of breaking it, long before any paperwork was ever signed. I share this story now, years later, not for sympathy, but because I know I am not the only person this has ever happened to, and I suspect I will not be the last. Illness makes us vulnerable in ways we rarely expect, and vulnerability, unfortunately, is something certain people know exactly how to use against us. If there is one thing I would want anyone watching this to take away, it is this: trust the people closest to you, because life is not livable without it. But never assume that trust means no one is capable of using it against you when the opportunity finally presents itself. Would you have noticed the warning signs before it was too late? I am still not entirely sure I would have. Stories like Daniel's remind us that betrayal rarely announces itself ahead of time. It hides in ordinary moments, in the people we least expect, in the quiet decisions made when we are too vulnerable to notice. Daniel's life was forever changed by two people he trusted completely, and no court ruling could ever fully restore what he lost. But he chose to share his story so that others might recognize the warning signs he missed and perhaps protect themselves before it is too late. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Daniel's position, do you think you would have noticed the signs earlier, the hesitations, the quiet phone calls, the small comments that seemed harmless at the time? Let us know in the comments what stood out most to you in this story, and whether you believe justice was truly served in the end. If this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened to a woman who trusted her own sister with her late husband's business, only to discover a betrayal that unfolded over almost a decade in complete silence. That story is coming very soon, and you will not want to miss it. Before you go, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss any of our upcoming true stories. We share these accounts because we believe real experiences like Daniel's deserve to be heard, and because so many of you have told us these stories help you feel less alone in your own experiences with trust, betrayal, and family. Thank you for watching this story all the way through. We will see you in the next one.